Welcome to the Directing Animation Livecast with Scott Weiser, who has gone from a studio of one to directing at Space Station Animation to supervising at Steamroller Animation, continuously developing over 15 feature film pitches on a quest to master the art of making deeply meaningful animated films. All right, we are on with Tod Polson right now. Tod has an extremely broad range of experience. You worked way back with Chuck Jones. That's amazing. Right. Yes, Hyperion Pictures, Buena Vista Television. Colossal Pictures. That's a name I hadn't heard in recent history for quite a while.
It's been gone a while. Yeah.
One of my most exciting things I saw about you is you wrote the book The Noble Approach.
That's right.
Which is one of the most coveted art of books out there. I still haven't gotten it. My friend got it early on and got it for the normal price, and now it's hundreds of dollars. So
it's hard to get nowadays. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you worked for Cartoon Network, Wild Brain, on the Book of Life at Real Effects for Leica. You go from Leica to Cartoon Saloon, from puppet animation to 2D animation, and then this short film, the 21 that I watched for the first time this morning, that is definitely in the style of Cartoon Saloon, and beautifully designed backgrounds and beautiful movie.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
we're anxious for it to get out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I actually did wait until this morning to watch it. I wanted to be fresh on it. So, but I watched it first thing, even before I started working on my personal work, my passion projects. And man, I was floored by it. It was just, I just kind of sat through the credits, just really emotional about what I had just seen. Feeling both, the bitterness and the weight of the subject, but also this lightness, because there's this hopeful message to it as well. And then I started writing my work, and I found that my work was more in depth than normal.
Interesting.
Like I was getting to a place of depth much quicker, but it's because of the subject matter of what you chose to focus on. Tell us a bit about what inspired, you just starting down the road of making this particular film.
Well, it's interesting. I had left I was a creative director at Cartoon Saloon, and I was reaching my 50th year, getting close, and I was like, if I don't start focusing more on my own films now, when? It's like, when am I going to do it? So I left Cartoon Saloon to make films that I wanted to explore my faith. I wanted to explore deeper subjects, more personal subjects. And then I was approached actually by Mandy Hart and Mark Rogers. They were my producers, which became the producers of the 21.
Wow.
They had wanted to do this film. Mark had been in Egypt and had been moved to make something. And I knew the story. I knew, it was a project, but I was like, I would never be able to work on something, like that. And when they actually approached Cartoon Saloon to see if they could help, and Cartoon Saloon said, well, it's not really something that we would do necessarily, but we know someone who would. And so Tom Moore basically recommended me to direct the project. And so I was like, wow, that's so it sort of fell in my lap. And it was a project that the story had moved me, and not necessarily just the event. I mean, their act of faith, of course, was inspiring in what they went through. But it was the family's response to ISIS, their sons and their fathers, and they've been killed on camera. And they came forward with a message of forgiveness. They just wanted these men. You would expect them to go, I want them to burn in hell. And that's been the response to the 21 trailer. Everyone's like, yeah, these guys, they deserve, they're evil. And the families were like, no, we want them to know the love of God. And that really moved me. And then when I went to Egypt and I met with the families, and they were telling me their stories, and the bloodied orange jumpsuits were laid out in the next room. They have them displayed there. It was just life-changing, really. It just like, I was like, wow. It's like, how do I tell this story, you know? But and it was, what they wanted is this. I said, what would you, if I made this film, what would you want it to say? And they said, we want it to be this story of forgiveness. And so that was the attempt to balance this extreme violence and hate with a story of hope. And so
Yeah.
that was the balance we tried to strike. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it reminded me of Hitchcock when the violence had to be off screen, right? And so he would use
Right.
a clever
So
approach where
that's even worse sometimes, I think, than
I know, it has
actually
much for
seeing
impact.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's one shot in there right after the big climactic moment that you have this really far away shot and just lines, moving across the screen, and that was amazing. Just
That's
the
that's
impact
my
of that.
favorite moment of the movie is at the end. I mean, it's not a spoiler, they die, right?
Yeah.
But the film was really made for that moment, and then I give like some black, and then the music comes up again, and it was meant to kind of replicate what the experience of an icon is, not to be worshipped, but to be reflective. And so once you get to that moment where you can take a breath, like, what did I just see? You have that moment where you start to think about it, and that is my favorite moment of the film after it's over. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and just the graphic nature of that too. Those lines moving down into the ocean, and yeah.
yeah,
The shot that comes right after that, was that real? Was that something ISIS had
it's
filmed?
real. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I had the
So
sense that it was.
that's from the ISIS video, the original that was in 2015 that they put out. And that's how the families discovered what had happened to their, to those men, the men. And it just was on the internet, and then suddenly it was on the news, and it was just like, it's graphic, it shows everything, and so my goal was to show bits of that, to remind people that, yeah, this is real, this really happened, but then cutaways about other stories, from other interviews and things about some of the things that actually happened. So you get a broader view of the actual situation and the experience that the men went through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. There were shots in there also, where you made the ISIS operatives, or whatever you call them, soldiers,
Yeah.
into like giants. Like the men were
Yes.
really small compared to them. And at first you didn't know it, you just felt it, but then all of a sudden you saw it and you're like, "Oh, wow, that's fascinating."
Well, it's going back to some of the symbolism they use in iconography, and so they do that sometimes to, show importance or show strength. And it was always a battle between good and evil in the whole film. So even the colors, certain colors like gold is the presence of God, for example, and
Oh,
then the
interesting.
black is traditionally in iconography, black is representative of evil or hell. So I tried to bring some of those elements in, and I don't know if audiences will get that, but hopefully they'll feel those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I also yeah, when I saw that first shot in the movie completely, I was wondering how'd they get the footage for this, if it was staged or anything, but it was the actual men.
It's the actual footage.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. That is crazy. What
Yeah.
a story. And it's so unusual that those ISIS operatives would just wax kind of artistic with the blood going into the water and everything. Like it makes you wonder what
they had those cameras on the
inspired
beach. They had
them to do that.
tracks to track with the martyrs. They had made them rehearse. They took them out 3 times onto the beach. They would have the knives to the throat, and the main ISIS speaker would be reading his lines, and the director would be going, "No, more passion, more passion." that's the stuff you don't get to see, right?
Oh.
And it's just this whole this whole production they put on for recruitment. That's what it was for, and to scare people,
Yeah. That's fascinating. So I was going to ask a question about that. There's just so much to ask. So at the beginning of the film, you also say that it's from the perspective of the prisoners and their families,
right.
and the people who were committing the atrocity.
That's right.
How did you get a hold of that information? Is it journaled? Is it?
So, a lot of it's online. They interviewed these guys. One guy in particular he was captured. He's in, I don't know if he's still alive, but he was on death row in Libyan prison.
Yeah.
And it's the creepiest thing ever, because he's being very matter of fact. It's like explaining his day at work. He goes, okay, and this is what happened, and then we killed them, and this and that, and this is where we buried them, and he was the reason they found the bodies years later and were able to bring them back to Egypt. There were cousins of the men in Libya that were made to point out where their relatives were, for example. So we were able to get interviews with them. The Coptic Church has information that we used. There's a lot of symbolism where the night that the men were killed, one of the priests had a dream about a black dog. So I tried to put that in there. Just so there's a lot of sources. A journalist that was embedded with the Libyan army went to where they were killed and went to the prison where they were kept. And so he was amazing. He said, this is the kind of music that the men were listening to, and they were listening to REM, Losing My Religion, of all things. That was one of their favorite songs. Bizarre.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because their goal the whole time was to get them to deny their faith.
Yeah.
And what a simple thing. Like, what a weird, simple thing to want. Like, will you just say you don't believe anymore?
Right.
And for some reason, that thing would flip a switch for them to be able to let these people go and not kill them.
Right.
Or torture them or whatnot. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and they tried to recruit them. I didn't put this in the film, but there was one man in particular, and ISIS called him Ghoul, because he kept attacking them and he kept trying to mess up their plans. And he actually said, I want to be the last to die, because in the ISIS video, they kill them all at once. But that's not how it happened exactly. They would do it bit by bit, hoping that some would give up their faith, seeing it. And they said, oh, this guy wants to be last because he wants to, he's going to recant and no one will know. But he just wanted to make sure that he was the last, so that the others wouldn't have to suffer as much. And
wow,
it's really interesting. It was hard because we have 21 martyrs, right? And I didn't want to pick one out in particular. I didn't want to highlight one of them and say this one's greater or this one's lesser. It was difficult in that way. And there's 21 guards as well, so there's a lot of characters.
So was Gould the one that was put in there at the very end, where he's like, I have the same faith as them, put me in? Or who? Is that a different
character? That's Matthew. So Matthew was from Ghana. That's another weird situation where there's a couple of stories about how he got there, but he wasn't part of the Egyptian Coptic. And those are the people that ISIS was really targeting. But Matthew, he got to know these guys, and basically, to me, his name is Matthew. I think that he grew up in a Christian home, or at least in a Christian community. So
the name like Matthew.
Yeah. A lot of people have said he came to faith there in the prison, which is a nice story, but I don't know that that's what happened. So I left it a little bit ambiguous. But what did happen is they tried to release him either way. And he said, no, their God is my God. And so he died with them, because again, he wouldn't give up his faith. And one of the stories is they captured him on the beach with a few of his friends. They said, no, we're Muslim, but he wouldn't do it. That's one of the stories about Matthew. It's strange that no one from his family or friends have ever come forward. We've looked, and other people have looked. There's even been money offered for information, and no one has come forward. It's very interesting. Yeah.
That is crazy. Wow. So speaking in filmmaking terms again, so an interesting dynamic happened where I mean, everything is so well designed. There's all this beautiful stuff in the background design, and the characters are designed, and the way you stage things is amazing. But I stopped looking at that. I started getting so sucked into the story, and
right,
that suddenly it wasn't like I was watching animation. And it wasn't until about halfway through that I snapped back in, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm watching animation. Like, oh, maybe I should look at the backgrounds a bit or something, but
no, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Because it is about the story, and all the designs, all the character designs, all the colors that were chosen were designed to push the emotion of the story. So every design element was about the story. So that's good, that it pushed that aspect of the film. Yeah.
Yeah. So was that your intention? Were you hoping? I mean, I imagine you were hoping people would get lost in it.
Yeah, for sure. And to build layers, like there's a lot of details that I wanted people to go back through it again to pick up on things that maybe they missed the first time. Like the presence of God. There was another symbol, but I tried to, in the clouds. So historically, biblically, God is represented by clouds. So I kept putting them through the film, but it shows the emotion of God. So instead of showing, during the torture sequence, instead of showing someone screaming, I have a lightning storm to show that emotion. And as they're going out, being walking along the beach, the cloud is leading them, right?
Yeah.
Just again to pull in some of these biblical references, and again, a lot of that is from testimony from one of the guards that escaped and was able to. Yeah, basically, he saw through halfway through all this torture and all this that God was not on his side. God was on their side, and it made him question. And at the end, he basically left ISIS. And other ISIS members say, "Well, he's just gone crazy. He's lost his mind."
Yeah.
Who knows?
Do those other
God
ones see the things though? They saw things. They saw soldiers.
Yeah.
And
at least he did. Yeah.
At least him. So is he the only account of someone who saw stuff, or
the only one we could find? Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And is he the same one that as they were driving, he saw the thing in the rear view window, or?
Well, that didn't happen that I know of, but it's based on accounts where they would see indications that God was there, that the presence of Christ, that because they would be praying and they would feel like there was like another presence there, but they didn't know what it was, and it spooked them. Not the martyrs, but the the guards. They were getting really spooked by all this stuff, according to the testimonies. Yeah.
And when the ground started to shake, is that a certain event where they have a recorded earthquake in the area, or was that just localized?
I couldn't find anything, but that's what so I put it in because of the testimony. I looked, and in my research, I tried to find out what the weather was like on the day they were taken out. I tried to find out the temperatures of things. I tried to be as accurate as I could, but I couldn't find an earthquake. Yeah.
Amazing.
It's interesting. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm just going off of what I was told,
Yeah.
And I'm Christian, but I really tried to be very neutral in the telling of the story.
Yeah.
It's just to bring in all these different points of view and just make it almost like a documentary to leave myself out of it in a way, you know.
That's good. Yeah, and you can let people draw their own conclusions about
That's right.
what's going
That's
on and
right.
how they feel about it, which is how it would be in the situation, right? I mean, that's the
Yes.
more honest choice, because you had people who did believe thoroughly and you had people who didn't believe thoroughly. And then you
That's right.
probably had amongst them people who were in the middle, you know. And I wouldn't be surprised if
Yeah.
some of the 21 shifted more toward the others, inspired by the others. But, you know,
Yes.
in a different situation that might be a little bit swayed, you know, into a bit of neutrality. But, you know, so you probably do have a range of reactions in that story anyway, which is really
Yeah.
fascinating
For
to think
sure.
about. Yeah.
There were men that were in prison there. They were breaking down, crying. They went through emotional roller coasters. It wasn't easy. You know,
No,
even with their faith, it wasn't an easy. And that's something that isn't really in the film, but they struggled emotionally. Yeah, for sure.
that's just something that takes a lot of time.
Yes.
And you're showing the story of 21 people at the same time,
Yeah,
you know.
that's
In
right.
order to do
Yeah.
that, you'd have to actually have a couple hours to track, you know,
Yes.
various characters and pick amongst those 21, like who are your 3, 4 primary characters that you get the closest to, and then
Right.
just kind of rank them down from there.
They're
Which,
they're working on a feature called The 11th Hour.
okay,
I know they have a trailer out online now.
yeah.
I know they're still trying to fundraise for that, so I don't know where that's at. But I did talk to the director briefly, and um, he's excited about the short, but he was hoping the 10th anniversary is in February, the 10th anniversary of their death. So
Hmm.
that's what we were really trying to hit, you know. And he was too, but he's still working on the project, I think. So
Yeah. I also love the logo at the very end of the 21 logo.
oh,
And I counted the dots. I paused the video, I counted them.
21.
Yeah, I won't be
Yeah.
surprised if a lot of people do that, because, you know, you're so impacted by that story and you're like, dots, there better be 21. You know? And
Yeah.
it was remarkable.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we had an amazing team. I mean, it wasn't. I was honored to work with these people,
Hmm.
but it's just like every person that was involved, I could see that they were put there for, I think, by God. Um, for example, Bishoy Gindi, he's an animator I admired for a long time.
Hmm.
Happens to be Coptic. He lives in the UK. But he was doing some test scenes and things, and then I didn't know this at the time, but he had studied iconography as a young man, so he would go in and make suggestions about some of the designs. I'm like, yeah, let's do that, you know.
Oh,
And
interesting. Do you have an example of that?
I'm sorry.
Do you have an example of that, like a certain part of the film that he did that with?
Oh well, he did the main dialogue scenes where the martyr is speaking, and talking about why he won't give up his faith. So those shots, those were some of the very first shots of the film, just as a proof of concept for the other animators that would come on board to sort of have to set the bar and set the style.
Hmm.
The animation style is very restrained, because I wanted these fantastical things that happen, just to have a little bit more power. We had just a legendary Disney animator working on the film. He's amazing and he's fast, but he kept
Recording
trying to do it.
stopped.
Oops.
No
He
worries.
kept trying to do. What's that?
I think your AI assistant
Oh.
stopped recording.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. But he would do kind of a caricature of the movement. He did the knife, this scene with the main guard who's giving his speech. Some beautiful animation, but it was almost too caricaturized. It was too full. So we had to pull it back just so that it because we have the real video of the real guy doing it, and he's very restrained. And so we didn't want to make a copy of that. We wanted to get the emotion of that moment,
So who was that animator?
John Pomeroy.
Oh, John Pomeroy. Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
But I just hesitated saying his name because he didn't want his name on the film for some reason. I don't know why, but he did beautiful work. So
yeah,
I don't know, and he's a Christian, so maybe he wanted to do it as an act of service. I don't know. So
didn't need credit or something like that.
There were a few people like that, and a lot of the artists just donated their time because they wanted to work on it.
Yeah,
they were moved by the story, and again, that's why it took so long, is because
how long did it take?
A friend.
I didn't know how long.
5 years.
5 years? Okay.
But we went through COVID. I went through a divorce. There were a lot of things that happened. I almost lost my eyesight. I had tears in my retinas, and I almost went blind. And so they had to do 2 or 3 surgeries. Yeah, 2 surgeries. They'll have to do a third one.
Goodness.
But it was trial by fire these last few years, and so there were months that I wasn't able to touch it.
That is so interesting how life hits during all these things. You had this dream of like, I'm going to make this amazing project, and it's just going to be this blissful experience, and you're like, oh, this is really hard. You arrive there, and you discover how difficult it actually is.
It is, but I feel like this project, of all the projects I've ever done, I've grown the most in my art.
Wow.
And grown the most as a person and in my faith. Because I worked with these amazing iconographers from Ukraine and Egypt and America. There's all these people that spoke into the project and looked at my art, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do that. You know what I mean? When I was first doing my concepts, they were too bright. They were too saturated. And so one of the Nicolas Serek, he's a great animator. He lives in Germany now, but he he just said, here's a palette that I use, and he painted these hand painted, and I'm like, oh yeah, the colors were much more subdued than something I would do. This was very early days, but
yeah.
It was like the lessons like that, because I've been used to working on Jorge Gutierrez's stuff, where everything has to pop. You have to feel the yellow burn your skin on the screen and stuff like that. So
would he say that?
This is a very different approach. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, with Jorge Gutierrez, I remember the Book of Life art book. I got that, and I would be tired like halfway through the book because of all the skulls and all the detail and all the
Yeah.
For some reason, Maya in the 3 doesn't do that to me as much. Maybe he started to find more of a balance.
Maybe, yeah.
But
I'm not sure. It's a different story too, but yeah.
Yeah, different stories. But I have both the art books, right? So I can compare the feeling looking at both the art books, and yeah, mine the 3 had a different feeling to it, even though it is the same like style. But it's maybe a more refined style, perhaps. But
maybe, yeah. But yeah, exactly. That's Jorge on the screen. That's his personality. He's bigger than life.
Oh, absolutely. So I want to dive a little bit back into your history, because this is obviously not your first project. This is like I don't know how many projects you've worked on.
I'm not sure either, actually.
Somewhere from 20 to 50 to more,
Yeah,
throughout your career. I'd like to speak to like the preparation and how all of those things started to tie in together to lead you to this. That'd be a fascinating thing to think about.
With, Maurice, really, Maurice Noble, when I was at Chuck Jones. One of the first assignments he gave us was to look at art of other cultures, and the lessons that he taught us was not to copy that art, but to try to look at this art, soak it in, and then take the most outstanding characteristics of that art and then apply that to the design you're doing for the animation. And so I was able to use that on Secret of Kells. I was able to use that with Jorge's stuff. It's just been throughout my career, I've always been working on projects that had a very strong cultural, just a very cultural background. So no pun intended there, but and so I've always been drawn to projects that have like a deeper, my when I went back to college after I'd studied with Maurice, I went back and did a master's, and I worked with the tribe out of Seattle, Washington, the people of the upper Skagit River. And I worked with some of their tribal elders and things, and worked with some of their artists trying to learn. Looking back now, I got a lot wrong, but it was an important step, and just working with the iconographers and looking at what was important to them. And so in some of our media stuff, we say it's inspired by iconography, which it is, but it's taking the elements of the iconography that I think speak emotionally to this particular story. If it were a different story, I wouldn't have designed it the exact same way, of course.
No. Yeah.
So that's one of the, I'm glad that it took as long as it did in a way, because we were able to develop the look.
Oh yeah.
And every few months we'd get another piece of information or another interview, and it would change some of the storytelling.
Huh.
It was just one of those things. And because it is a real story, I tried to be really respectful to the Coptic people, to the men who died, to get it right. And now that I'm finished, there's a few things I found out since then that I know are wrong, but
Okay. I'm fascinated to know what that is. What's wrong?
Well, okay, there's a sequence where they're pulling sandbags on the beach.
Uh-huh.
And that was how it was described in the interview that I had. But a later interview said, well, actually it was tied to their bodies, so they were made to like walk and crawl around with these big heavy bags, as opposed to like
dragging it behind them. Okay.
So it's like little, it doesn't change things so much, but it's, technically it wasn't done exactly that way. So
right. It's amazing that you jogged my memory, and there was a part where you have waves, and the edge of the waves have the round shapes, right? But you also had like these jagged lines, geometric lines that coming behind it in the waves, which I'd never seen that before.
Right.
In waves.
Yeah, it's again trying to make that contrast between good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
So even in the darkest moments, the deepest dark blacks of the torture sequences, there's still a rim of gold which represents God. So even in those dark moments, he's there. He's, you're reminded that he's not gone, and those colors were taken from the Harrowing of Hell, some of those classic traditional icons. So we took those and then tweaked it a little bit to fit our story.
Yeah. Amazing. So having worked in several, like you've worked in stop motion, in 2D,
a little bit, yeah,
in CG. What do you think you've learned from that synthesis? Because I've done it as well. I think it's fascinating, but I haven't done it as much at high level on all of those things. So.
I think that the stories speak to you. I think some stories just naturally feel better in CG. Mm-hmm. Some feel better in 2D. A lot of it depends on your budget.
Yeah. Yep, I know
this
that.
This is the first 2D film I've done in a few years, and I was happy to do it. But this was an easy one because iconography is such a big part of the Coptic life. Mm-hmm. It just was a no-brainer that it would
be
animated. That it would be 2D, that it would try to hit some of those elements that are in their daily life.
Yeah. another thing that lends itself really well to animation. I think this is how Grave of the Fireflies was, right? That movie is such a heavy movie
Oh, it's one of my
that,
favorites,
oh
but I've
yeah.
only seen it like twice, you know.
Well, I've seen it more than twice. The first time it devastated me. The second time I
It
watched it, I was
was,
like, okay, I now have to watch it again because it took me 10 years to get up the courage. So I better
yeah,
watch it again. And the third time watching it, I was just in awe of how beautiful the whole thing was. I
it's
was actually
amazing.
smiling the whole time, which is
Oh,
interesting to be smiling at such a sad story. But it isn't
yeah.
really just a sad story. It was a story of two kids trying to make the most of a bad situation, you know?
So well done.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, even the part at the end that, I was sobbing the first time I saw it. I was sitting there smiling, because it really was beautiful. It was like the
It
best
is.
moments that these two had had together,
Yeah.
and that's what he re-experiences at the end. And
Yeah.
one reason that lended itself so well to animation is it takes the edge off
Yes, exactly.
as far as like the cringe factor that you get, like
Mhm.
to like the moment you your character put the knife to
The
the
night.
throat.
Yeah.
You start seeing knife after knife after knife going to that throat. I started to feel the cringe coming on, but then the next shot, the cringe happened between the cuts. So at that point, I just got the emotion, which
Right.
I think is one thing that animation does so well.
It does.
And
Yeah.
some people think you can do that in live action, but it is definitely different.
It's different. Yeah. Well, and one of the main audiences is the families and
Yeah.
their children, and something that when they're old, these young kids, they'll still have that, as part of their life, and they can share it. Not that I'm trying to downplay the violence, but I also didn't want to glorify the violence. And I think animation is great in that it does take that edge off in it, but it still has the poetry of the symbolism of what happened there, you know.
Yeah. So looking at your background, you have about 20 years of freelance. Was this freelance that you would actually go and relocate to the studio? Or were you doing it
A
remotely?
lot of times, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I relocated to Thailand for about 20 years.
Wow.
Because it was, well, I love Thailand. But it's I I grew up in Wyoming, and the Wyoming winters are,
Ah,
I don't want Wyoming winter,
no,
um
no.
but I was able to live there for 1 month, um well, 6 months actually, for 1 month, and I was in California at the time. And so I was able to go there. Maurice Noble and I were invited to go over to Thailand to make our first short, which was called The Pumpkin of Nifar. And that was, and unfortunately he passed away before we could go over together. He had dreamed of going and working and living in Thailand, because his uncle was a missionary in Thailand from about 1906 to 19, I don't remember, but like he has generations of family there in Thailand. And
Wow.
so as a young man, he had always wanted to go there and live in Thailand. And he, so we went over and traveled. That was one of the places that we explored. And we got to go to the leper colony that his uncle had started, and got to meet people that had known his uncle. And that was very emotional. And so
Mm.
Thailand was always, I don't know, there was something special for me anyway with just that relationship with Maurice. And then I got asked to direct a feature, and then I got brought into the Monk Studios, and we made the Gingerbread Man short. And then there'd be times where I'd go for a year or two to Ireland, and I would teach in Denmark every year at the school animation workshop, for about 15 years. Amazing students, amazing artists there in Denmark. Wow. Um, yeah, so it's just been, lived in China, taught a year in Korea. Yeah. Just trying, and part of it's intentional in the fact that one of the lessons that Maurice taught was to build your visual memory, to build this dictionary of visual experiences in your head so that you can become a better designer. And that's why he took me on trips to Turkey and to Indonesia to study shadow puppets and all these things, because once that's in there, it gives your work a depth that you can't get by just sitting in your living room watching Disney films, you know.
Yeah.
So that's what he said. So I took
agree
that
with
to
him.
heart.
I agree with him. Yeah, absolutely. And right now in our world, I think our entertainment's suffering a little bit because we are like disconnecting from actual life so much,
Yeah.
not
Well,
living.
I think that's why, and I've seen in a lot of young students now, a real yearning to tell real stories, to tell something that has heart and depth to it. And I think that's a reaction to AI. It's a reaction to just sort of consumer level animation and entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot of gloss, but not a lot of heart necessarily. There are projects out there that do, but I guess they've always been hard to find,
Yeah, it's hard to get them funded.
Yes,
For sure.
exactly. Because you can't make money ever. Well, at least I can't. So
yeah. Yeah, I found ways to slowly and steadily, but yeah. Well, that's awesome. So our the last question I usually ask is called the Get Wiser moment.
Okay.
And it's definitely a very filmmaker question.
Okay.
So the question is, if my goal is to get the highest potency of truth into a film, what approach would you recommend?
Be brave.
Be brave.
Be brave and be vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's one of the hardest things for me as a filmmaker, as an artist, is to put yourself on screen. Pete, I showed this to Pete Docter, the film, and he was able to consult. And it was a big help because some of the things that I was afraid to put on screen, he said, no. He says, people are going to react if you put real things, expose yourself a little bit, even if they don't know it, but your real emotions, your real feelings, people are going to relate to that, they connect to that in ways that if you were just telling a story, they wouldn't, so being vulnerable, and he does it with his own characters as well, where he will reveal things about his characters that might make the audience a little bit uncomfortable, or but then it endears them, those characters, to the audience. So yeah, and it's hard to do.
Yeah. I still feel like his best film is Monsters Inc. And with Sully, you have this big burly character who is like so gaga over this little girl, right?
Yeah.
And I couldn't get enough of that.
Yeah.
And I remember, I was a little kid, so I didn't cry the first time I saw it. It was like somewhere from the third to the fifth time I saw it, where we were on a trip to like a camping trip, and we were in the car. We got a little DVD player that we could play in the DVD or in the vehicle. And I remember just that moment where he opens the door at the end and she says, "Kitty." I had tears in my eyes. I was like, well, that was interesting. Where'd that come from,
Exactly.
But somehow this boy who didn't even have I didn't have kids yet, was moved. And now that I have kids, I'm probably game over.
Yeah.
In that area.
And the person that made that film had experienced life, right? There's no way they could have put those things in there, whether it was Pete himself or one of the story guys or whatever.
Joe Ranft.
That was real. Yeah, Joe was.
He was amazing.
I mean, he's the greatest example of being vulnerable. He was just big as life, open, quiet guy, but he wasn't afraid to get real.
Yeah. My good friend Brian McDonald, who's been on the show, consults at Pixar and various places. He feels like that was their secret weapon, was Joe.
Yeah, Joe is amazing. Joe Ranft.
Yeah, he was. Well, awesome. Did you meet Joe Grant too?
I met him, but I didn't know him.
Okay.
Yeah. And Joe Ranft used to come by CalArts sometimes. And Pete too, because Pixar hadn't really even started at that point. Well, it had, but not with like toys.
Right.
They were just getting toys, so we didn't know what the heck Pixar was. None of us wanted to go up there, because if you saw computer animation in 1992, it was ugly. It's like, why would I want to do that?
Yeah.
You know? But they were just hanging out there. It was, pretty amazing. Tim Burton would sometimes sit in the back of the Bijou Theater and just watch films and stuff. It was weird. Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. Well, you have such a breadth of experience. I'm envious. I hope I can accomplish some of the things you've accomplished as well, artistically. And,
you will.
Yeah.
It sounds like you inspiring. That you're getting your own stuff off the ground. That's awesome.
Yep. Slowly but surely. It's like the tortoise and I don't know.
That's the only way to do it, though. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Well, wonderful. Is there anything you'd like to say before we end?
No, just thank you. And to the young people, it's hard with the social media I'm really uncomfortable with social media as well. But if you stick true to your vision and, like, you have something that you really want to do, stick with it, even if it takes 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's worth it. It's totally worth it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sometimes I'm even writing a paragraph a day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that's what you got to do. You know, that's what you have time for. So, of course, I'm also supervising on top of that and animating and all that stuff.
You're working. Yeah. You got a life and family and all those things. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's still worth having that extra stuff that that really pushes you as an artist. And
for the film, I spent 2 hours a day. I tried to force myself. I mean, there were months I couldn't, but when I was on a streak, it'd be 2 hours a day.
Okay.
And it was slow.
Yeah. Roald Dahl was 3 hours a day. That's how much he would write. He wrote tons of big classic books that have been made into movies and everything. So
little by little, step by step. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you for being on the show, Tod.
Yeah. And thank you.
Until next time, I hope we all get a little wiser. It plays. Thank you for watching the Directing Animation Livecast, hosted by Scott Weiser, audio version edited by Kira Horowitz, copyright Scott Weiser LLC 2024. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell.